The Interspecies Council reception hall smelled like ozone and optimism, which Glorvex found suspicious. In his 47 years as a xenopsychologist, he had learned that optimism usually preceded disaster. The vaulted crystal ceiling refracted light into colors that shouldn't exist, and floating refreshment platforms drifted past carrying sustenance for species that breathed everything from methane to pure spite. Holographic welcome banners cycled through 89 languages, most of which said something encouraging about unity and cooperation and other concepts Glorvex had stopped believing in around his third decade. He stood near the beverage synthesis station, his coral-colored fungal flesh slightly damp from the station's humidity controls, watching the bioluminescent spots along his arms pulse in a steady rhythm that meant he was calm and professional and definitely not dreading this assignment. The root filaments extending from his fingertips twitched as he adjusted his dark teal laboratory coat, the mycelic's cultural patterns embroidered at the collar catching the ambient lavender light. Beside him, Verixa clicked her silver beak twice, which in Skyvan meant something between annoyance and resignation. She stood a full head taller than him, her sleek silver-blue plumage immaculate, the cobalt crest feathers swept back in what she probably thought was a professional arrangement. Her midnight blue security jacket fit perfectly across her shoulders, silver rank insignia gleaming, tactical vest visible at the collar, utility belt loaded with enough equipment to handle a small invasion. Her brilliant golden eyes tracked every movement in the hall with the kind of paranoid efficiency that made her excellent at her job and terrible at parties. "I don't understand why we need two humans," Verixa said, her voice carrying that ultrasonic harmonic that made Glorvex's spots flicker. One was already excessive. "Council policy," Glorvex replied, watching a crystalline Vathari diplomat drift past, their body chiming softly with each movement. "Cultural exchange requires minimum 2 representatives for species application. Besides, what could possibly go wrong with humans? They're carbon-based, oxygen-breathing, standard bilateral symmetry. Boring, really." Virixa's tail fan spread slightly, iridescent feathers catching light. "You haven't read the preliminary reports, have you?" "I skimmed them. They come from a death world. Most species think their homeworld is challenging," Glorvex said, his chest cavity resonating the words in a tone he hoped sounded dismissive. "It's all relative perspective, and their planet tried to kill them with ice ages, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, and pandemic diseases," Virixa interrupted, her crest rising half an inch. "They survived by becoming the scariest thing on their world. They're pursuit predators, Glorvex. They chase prey until it dies of exhaustion." Glorvex's spots dimmed slightly. "That's just biology. Doesn't mean they sweat poison to cool down while running." "It's not poison. It's just, and they're here," Verixa said, her beak snapping shut with a click. The humans entered the reception hall like they owned it, which Glorvex supposed they did in the existential sense that apex predators own whatever space they occupy. The female was smaller than expected, petite by human standards, with long auburn hair woven into a practical braid that hung between her shoulder blades. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer over an ivory silk blouse, fitted black trousers, sleek ankle boots, every piece of clothing precisely arranged like armor disguised as diplomacy. Her green eyes swept the hall with obvious delight, and when she smiled at a passing aquatic tide march who immediately fled behind a refreshment platform, the expression seemed genuinely warm. The male human was taller, broader, moving with the kind of easy confidence that made Glorvex's evolutionary instincts start composing his obituary. Dark hair, ice blue eyes, angular jaw, wearing a charcoal gray three-piece suit that probably cost more than Glorvex's research budget, crisp white shirt, burgundy silk tie, polished black shoes that clicked against the floor with each step. He looked like someone had designed a human specifically to make recruitment posters, and Glorvex hated him immediately in the way prey species hate things with forward-facing eyes. "Dr. Glorvex," the female human said, walking directly toward them without hesitation, extending her hand in that bizarre human gesture that involved grabbing each other's appendages. "I'm Rosalind, this is my colleague Tristan. We're so excited to be here." Glorvex extended his hand carefully, trying not to let his root filaments touch her skin, but she grasped his hand firmly and shook it with enthusiasm that made his spots blink in surprise. Her hand was warm, dry, strong, and she didn't even flinch at his fungal texture. Tristan shook Varixa's hand next, and the Skyven's crest shot up 3 full inches, golden eyes widening as she processed the implication of a predator species initiating friendly contact. "Welcome to Nexus Station," Glorvex managed, pulling his hand back and watching his filaments coil nervously. "We're here to facilitate your integration into Council protocols and assess cultural compatibility metrics." "That sounds way more official than it needs to be," Rosalind said, laughing. The sound made a nearby insectoid Latixian drop their beverage cube. "We're just here to share information about Earth and learn about everyone else. This place is amazing. Is that ceiling actual crystal or synthetic?" "Synthetic composite with crystalline matrix," Varixa said stiffly, her tail fan still half spread. "Grown in orbital foundries. Standard construction for stations this size." "Beautiful," Rosalind said, looking up with obvious appreciation, and Glorvex realized with creeping horror that she meant it. Humans found things beautiful, apex predators with aesthetic preferences. The universe was stranger than his worst hypotheses. "Perhaps we should move somewhere quieter," Glorvex suggested, gesturing toward a side corridor with one hand while his other hand's filaments twisted into anxious knots. "Initial assessments work better without ambient distractions." And, sure, Tristan agreed easily. "Though I have to say, the ambient distractions are fascinating. Is that species over there silicon-based? The one that looks like ambulatory geode?" "Crystalline Vothari, yes," Glorvex said. "They communicate through harmonic resonance and find oxygen atmospheres mildly corrosive. We accommodate 47 different species on this station, each with specific environmental needs." "That must be incredibly complex to manage," Rosalind said as they walked through the crowd. A reptilian Hixorn pressed flat against the wall as they passed, scales shifting to camouflage colors. "The logistics alone would be a nightmare. On Earth, we can barely manage treaties between nations on the same planet." They reached Glorvex's research laboratory through a series of corridors that curved gently to match the station's rotating habitat ring. The lab doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing his professional domain, living specimen walls behind containment fields, a holographic projection sphere floating in the center like a small galaxy. Workstations adapted for various limb configurations, equipment humming with the constant background noise that helped him think. The walls were a soft cream color, the lighting adjustable to any species' comfort range, and everything smelled like the antiseptic he used to keep fungal spores from colonizing his equipment. "Please, sit," Glorvex said, gesturing to chairs he'd specifically requisitioned for human physiology. Bilateral species with rigid spines required such strange furniture. This is just preliminary conversation to establish baseline cultural parameters. Nothing invasive or uncomfortable. Rosalind and Tristan sat, looking relaxed and at ease, which made Glorvex's spots pulse faster. Vyrixa remained standing near the door, her security instincts apparently overriding social protocol. Her golden eyes tracked every movement the humans made, and her crest feathers stayed elevated in a state of sustained alert. "So," Glorvex began, activating his holographic notepad with a gesture, "let's start with something simple. What do you miss most about Earth? This helps us understand psychological attachment patterns and potential homesickness factors." Rosalind's face brightened immediately. "Oh, that's easy. I miss frost." Glorvex's filaments stopped twitching. "Frost? Is that a climatic condition? I know Earth has significant temperature variation between regions." "No," Rosalind said, pulling out a small rectangular device from her blazer pocket. Her phone, Glorvex recognized from the briefing materials. Humans carried personal computers everywhere like portable extension brains. "Frost is my pet. Here, I have pictures." She tapped the screen several times, then turned it toward Glorvex. The image showed Rosalind, dressed casually in what appeared to be domestic setting, sitting on furniture beside an animal that made every one of Glorvex's spots flash bright emergency yellow simultaneously. The creature was massive, easily half Rosalind's size, covered in thick gray and white fur, with a long snout full of visible teeth, pointed ears, and eyes that reflected the camera flash like ice-catching moonlight. It sat beside her with its tongue hanging out, and Rosalind had one arm draped casually over its shoulders like they were colleagues at a social gathering. "That's," Glorvex said, his voice coming out strangled from his chest cavity, "that's a wolf." "Yes," Rosalind said happily, swiping to another picture. This one showed the wolf sprawled across a bed, belly up, clearly inside her dwelling. "He's a gray wolf, Canis lupus. I've had him since he was a puppy. He's 4 years old now. Glorvex's spots weren't just flashing anymore, they were strobing like a emergency beacon. Behind him, Virixa made a sound like someone had reversed her respiratory system. Her crest stood completely vertical, every feather extended to maximum height, and her tail fan spread so wide it nearly touched both walls. You, Virixa said slowly, her beak clicking between each word, have an apex predator living in your dwelling. Well, yes, Rosalind said, scrolling through more pictures. This one's my favorite. He's sleeping on my bed. He takes up most of it. And here he is playing with the neighbor's kids. He's very gentle. The image showed the wolf surrounded by small humans, children, the galaxy's most vulnerable demographic, and the predator was allowing them to touch its fur while its mouth hung open in what Rosalind probably thought was a smile but looked to Glorvex like a preview of mandible configuration. Your species, Glorvex said carefully, watching his filaments tie themselves into knots that would require medical intervention to untangle, keeps wolves as companions. Some people do, Rosalind said. Though wolves are pretty rare as pets. Most people have dogs. What? Virixa said from near the door, her voice climbing into ultrasonic ranges. Our dogs. Tristan, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward with an expression that suggested he was about to be helpful. Dogs are domesticated wolves. We've been selectively breeding them for about 40,000 years. There are hundreds of breeds now, different sizes and temperaments. Some people prefer small dogs, others like large breeds. My sister has 3 German Shepherds. Glorvex's spots went dim, then bright, then started blinking in random patterns that spelled out existential crisis in bioluminescent mycelics. You've been breeding apex predators. For 40,000 years, intentionally. They're not really apex predators anymore, Rosalind said, apparently trying to be reassuring. They're domesticated. Frost wouldn't hurt anyone. He's a sweetheart. She showed another picture. The wolf was wearing some kind of fabric around its neck, bright red, with a bow. This was last Christmas, she explained. Glorvex felt spores beginning to release from his spots. The cinnamon smell filling the laboratory as his system started overloading. Virixa's feathers were fully puffed now, making her look twice her normal size, and she was emitting ultrasonic chirps that cycled through every alarm frequency in the Skyvan vocabulary. Let me understand this correctly, Glorvex said, his voice barely resonating. You took wolves, which are pack-hunting pursuit predators with bite force capable of crushing bones, and you selectively bred them into companions that live inside your homes and interact with your offspring. That's a pretty clinical way to put it, Tristan said. But yes, essentially. Dogs are considered man's best friend on Earth. Most families have at least one. They're very loyal and affectionate. Some are working animals, herding livestock or assisting police, but most are just pets. Pets, Virixa repeated, her voice flat. You keep predators as pets. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds weird, Rosalind said, laughing again. Several of Glorvex's specimens contracted in their containment fields. They're family members. Frost sleeps in my bed. He comes to work with me when regulations allow. He's got his own veterinarian for medical care. I have an entire album of photos if you want to see more. No, Glorvex and Virixa said simultaneously. Rosalind looked slightly disappointed but put her phone away. I really do miss him. He's in the quarantine bay right now, going through biological decontamination protocols. They said it would take a few days to clear him for general station access. The laboratory went very quiet. Even the equipment seemed to stop humming. Glorvex's spots went completely dark, a physiological response that only occurred during system shutdown or imminent death. Virixa's beak opened slowly, then closed, then opened again without any sound coming out. You brought the wolf, Virixa finally said. Here, to the station. Of course, Rosalind said, looking confused by their reaction. I'm going to be here for 6 months. I wasn't going to leave Frost on Earth that long. He'd be miserable. Plus, I thought it would be good for cultural exchange. Let people meet him, see that Earth predators aren't scary. Glorvex released so many spores that the laboratory began to smell like an industrial cinnamon processing facility. His filaments were vibrating at frequencies that defied physics. Somewhere in his mind, his entire dissertation on predator-prey dynamics was catching fire and jumping off a cliff. I think, he said quietly, we should continue this conversation later, after I've had time to review some additional materials. Sure, Tristan said, standing smoothly. We have orientation scheduled with 3 other departments today anyway. It was nice meeting you both. Rosalind stood as well, smiling that warm smile that was probably meant to be friendly but looked to Glorvex like every nightmare his ancestors had evolved to fear. Thank you for being so welcoming. I can't wait to introduce you to Frost properly. You're going to love him. They left. The door slid shut behind them. Glorvex and Vyrixa stood in the laboratory, not moving, not speaking, processing what had just occurred. Finally, Vyrixa said, "We need to call an emergency council session." Yes, Glorvex agreed, watching his spots slowly return to dim coral glow. Yes, we absolutely do. His filaments were still vibrating. Somewhere in quarantine, a wolf named Frost was waiting to be released onto a station full of species that had spent millions of years evolving to avoid exactly that scenario. The universe, Glorvex decided, had a terrible sense of humor. The emergency assembly arena was designed to hold 500 beings from 47 different species in comfort and safety, with species-specific seating pods arranged in amphitheater tiers around a central presentation platform. Right now, it held approximately 450 extremely uncomfortable aliens, none of whom felt remotely safe, all staring at the 40-foot holographic display that currently showed a close-up image of Frost's face, tongue lolling out, eyes half closed in what Rosalind assured them was contentment, but looked to everyone else like predatory assessment. Glorvex sat in his designated pod, spots cycling through colors that didn't have names in any language, releasing periodic puffs of cinnamon-scented spores every time Rosalind advanced to the next slide. His dark teal laboratory coat was rumpled, and his root filaments had given up trying to maintain composure and were just lying limp against his hands like defeated appendages. Vyrixa stood at her security station near the emergency exits, midnight blue jacket perfectly pressed despite the crisis, tactical vest visible at the collar. Her cobalt crest feathers had been standing at full emergency height for 3 hours now and showed no signs of relaxing. Her golden eyes tracked Rosalind's every movement with the intensity of someone watching a thermal detonator bounce downstairs. On the central platform, Rosalind smiled at the assembled aliens with genuine enthusiasm. Her charcoal blazer somehow still unwrinkled, ivory silk blouse still pristine, auburn braids still perfectly arranged. She'd set up her presentation with the confidence of someone who thought she was sharing delightful cultural information rather than systematically destroying every species' understanding of natural law. Tristan stood beside her in his charcoal 3-piece suit, looking like a recruitment poster for apex predators, occasionally advancing slides when Rosalind gestured, completely unaware that half the arena was planning evacuation routes. So, as I was saying, Rosalind continued, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustic design, human relationships with animals are a fundamental part of our culture. Dogs and wolves are just the beginning. Let me show you some other examples. She clicked to the next slide. A small furred quadruped with forward-facing eyes and retractable claws appeared on the 40-foot display, sitting on a human's lap, looking directly at the camera with an expression that somehow conveyed both contempt and murder. "This is a cat," Rosalind said brightly. "Felis catus. They're one of the most popular pets on Earth. We have approximately 600 million of them living in human homes." A reptilian Hixorn in the 3rd tier made a choking sound, scales flashing through camouflage patterns so fast it looked like a malfunctioning hologram. Glorvex's spots went dark entirely. "Cats are obligate carnivores," Tristan added helpfully. "They're incredibly efficient predators. Their hunting success rate is around 32%, which is higher than lions. They hunt for recreation even when well-fed." An insectoid Latixian in the front row stood abruptly and walked toward the exit, mandibles clicking in patterns that translated to several phrases council protocol didn't permit in official assemblies. Vyrixa didn't stop them. "Next we have horses," Rosalind said, clicking to a new slide showing a massive 4-legged creature with a human sitting on its back. "These are prey animals, but we domesticated them for transportation about 6,000 years ago. We literally ride them. They can weigh over 1,000 pounds and kick hard enough to kill a person, but we teach children to ride them for recreation." A crystalline Vothari in the upper tier began chiming in distress frequencies. 3 smaller species got up and left without explanation. "Humans ride prey animals," Vyrixa said quietly to herself. Tail fan spread so wide it knocked over a security monitor. "Oh, and falconry," Rosalind said excitedly, showing an image of a human with an enormous bird perched on their arm, talons clearly visible, beak sharp enough to tear flesh. We train predatory birds to hunt with us. This tradition goes back thousands of years. Glorvex released so many spores the air around his pod looked like someone had detonated a cinnamon bomb. Now these are controversial, Rosalind admitted, showing the next slide. A human held a long, cylindrical creature with scales and no legs, wrapped around their arm. Snake keeping isn't for everyone. These are reptilian predators, some venomous, some constrictors, but many humans keep them as pets. Some people even keep spiders, Tristan added. Tarantulas mostly, 8-legged predatory arthropods. Some people find them calming. Approximately 30 more aliens left the arena. Glorvex watched them go and wished his species had evolved the capacity for unconsciousness. But here's my favorite, Rosalind said, her green eyes sparkling. Some humans keep bears. The 40-foot holographic display showed a massive furred creature standing upright, easily twice human height, with claws like knives and a mouthful of teeth that could crack bones. Next to it, a human stood with their arm around its midsection. The arena erupted. Every species with evolutionary prey background stood simultaneously and moved toward exits with practiced efficiency. The crystalline Vothari were chiming emergency frequencies. The insectoid Latixians were clicking distress patterns. The reptilian Hixorns were flashing colors that meant abandoned station. Virixa's beak opened and stayed open, frozen in an expression of complete system failure. Her crest feathers were standing so vertical they defied gravity. These are rare cases, Tristan said quickly. Most people don't keep bears. There are regulations. But some do, Rosalind confirmed happily. Usually rescued cubs that can't be released into the wild. There are sanctuaries where humans work directly with bears, wolves, large cats, all kinds of predators. We rehabilitate them, help preserve their populations. You preserve predators, Glorvex said, his voice barely resonating. You intentionally maintain their populations. Of course, Rosalind said, looking confused. They're important for ecosystem balance. We drove many species to near extinction, so now we protect them. It's our responsibility. Let me see if I understand, Virixa said slowly, each word accompanied by an ultrasonic shriek. Your species became the dominant predator, and then you looked at all the other predators and decided to make them your friends. Yes, Rosalind and Tristan said together. Virixa sat down, which was significant because Skyvan security officers never sat during active situations. Her legs just stopped supporting her and she folded into her security pod like someone had cut her power supply. Glorvex was releasing spores continuously now, a streaming cloud of cinnamon that was going to require industrial air filtration. I think, he said quietly, we need to see Frost. Really? Rosalind's face brightened immediately. That's wonderful. Let me contact Quarantine and have them bring him up. No, Verixa said weakly from her pod. Please no. Rosalind was already speaking into her communication device, giving authorization codes. The remaining aliens in the arena, perhaps 200 now, waited with resigned tension. 15 minutes later, the arena doors opened. Frost entered, and every evolutionary instinct in the room started composing final wills. The wolf was larger in person than the holographic images suggested. Gray and white fur thick enough to hide muscle structure, moving with the fluid grace of something designed by physics to catch things that ran. Ice blue eyes swept the arena, taking in the gathered aliens, black nose twitching, pointed ears swiveling toward every sound, massive paws patting against the floor. Mouth hanging open, tongue lolling out, displaying teeth that could tear through flesh like tissue paper. Behind Frost, a quarantine technician followed nervously, holding a lead connected to a collar around the wolf's neck, though everyone understood the lead was decorative. Frost, Rosalind called, her voice warm and delighted. The wolf's ears perked up, and then he was moving, crossing the arena floor in bounds that covered 3 meters each. The lead slipping from the technician's hand as 80 kilograms of apex predator launched himself toward the human. 40 species made sounds of horror simultaneously. Virixa's feathers puffed to twice her body volume. Glorvex released enough spores to start a cinnamon plantation. Frost reached Rosalind and his tail started wagging, moving so fast it blurred, his entire rear half wiggling with excitement. He reared up, placing his front paws on Rosalind's shoulders, bringing his face level with hers, and then he licked her face with a tongue the size of a salad plate. Rosalind laughed, scratching behind his ears. Good boy. Yes, I missed you too. You're such a good boy. The wolf dropped back to all fours, tail still wagging at impossible speeds, and looked around the arena with delighted interest. Tristan walked over and rubbed Frost's head, and the wolf leaned into it, making a sound that was apparently pleasure but sounded like a volcanic eruption warning. Does anyone want to pet him? Rosalind asked the arena. The silence was absolute. Then something extraordinary happened. An aquatic tide march in the lower tier, a small being with translucent blue skin and 4 tentacles, slowly raised one appendage. I would like to try. Verixa made a sound like someone had reversed her digestive system. Glorvex's spots began flashing colors that meant no in 15 languages. But the tide march floated down and approached. The wolf watched, tail still wagging, head tilted in curiosity. Just let him smell your hand first, Rosalind instructed. The tide march extended a tentacle. Frost leaned forward, black nose twitching as he processed the alien's scent. Then his tail wagged harder, and the tide march carefully touched his fur. He's warm, the tide march said, surprised. And soft. The wolf's tongue came out and licked the tide march's tentacle once, and the alien made a gurgling sound that was either terror or delight. Would anyone else like to try? Tristan asked. Slowly, hesitantly, more beings approached. A crystalline Vothari, chiming nervously. An insectoid Latixian, mandibles clicking. Each one received the same treatment. Sniff assessment, tail wagging, gentle interaction, no violence whatsoever. Glorvex watched this and felt his entire understanding of the universe reorganizing. His spots were still flashing, but now in patterns that meant confusion rather than panic. This doesn't make sense, Glorvex said quietly. Predator-prey dynamics don't work this way. It violates fundamental evolutionary principles. Unless, Verixa said slowly, humans didn't befriend their predators. They became something that predators wanted to befriend. Glorvex's spots went very still. That thought settled into his mind like a key into a lock. Wolves hadn't been tamed. They joined the more successful pack. Oh no, Glorvex said softly. Oh no. On the arena floor, Frost had discovered that if he sat down and looked at aliens with his head tilted, they would pet him. His tail was wagging continuously. Rosalind was explaining proper ear-scratching technique to a nervous reptilian Hixorn whose scales were shifting to cautiously interested patterns. See? He's harmless. Very good boy, Tristan said. We should probably update our files, Verixa said faintly. Humans aren't apex predators. They're apex friendship predators. They make friends with things that hunt. They broke the food chain. Glorvex's spots cycled through every color, then settled on dim orange that meant reluctant acceptance. His entire dissertation would need to be rewritten. I need to lie down, he said quietly. On the arena floor, Frost rolled onto his back, exposing his belly to increasingly confident aliens taking turns touching his fur. His tongue hung out sideways, tail still wagging, looking absolutely delighted. Anyone else want to meet him? Rosalind asked. More beings descended from their pods. Within 20 minutes, Frost was surrounded by dozens of aliens, all taking turns petting the enormous predator who had decided that making friends was his primary function. Tristan pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. This is going in the Cultural Exchange Report. Interspecies Friendship Initiative. First successful contact. By the time Rosalind and Tristan left with Frost, the wolf had received pets from 73 different individuals representing 31 species. The arena floor smelled like cinnamon from Glorvex's stress spores, but also like the beginning of something unprecedented. Verixa finally stood, smoothing her midnight blue jacket. I'm putting in my transfer request. Where will you go? Glorvex asked. Somewhere humans haven't reached yet, though I suspect that's temporary. Glorvex released one final puff of cinnamon-scented spores and began packing his research materials. Sometimes apex predators wagged their tails and wanted belly rubs. Sometimes the universe was stranger than any theory could predict. Throughout the galaxy, species were receiving footage of today's assembly, watching a wolf play with aliens, processing the impossible reality of humans and their pets, coming to the same inevitable conclusion. Humans weren't dangerous because they were predators. They were dangerous because they made predators love them. The cinnamon smell would take weeks to dissipate. The implications would take much longer. Glorvex left through the exit. spots finally settling into calm coral glow. And somewhere deep in his mind, he had to admit one truth. Frost was, objectively speaking, a very good boy.